Hello, people of World War Zero. We're so happy to be here with you. And I'm Amanda Little. I'm a professor at Vanderbilt University and a columnist at Bloomberg. And I am delighted to be interviewing Heather Zichal, whose career I have been following for years in the public and private sectors. And because it is such a big and amazing career, I'm going to let Heather introduce herself, the germane information, then I'll jump in.
Great. Well, thanks for the opportunity to join you today. As you noted, I have spent a few years in Washington, D.C. working on climate and energy policy. I was lucky enough to work in Congress for then Senator John Kerry. I worked in the Obama administration as one of President Obama's climate czars. So I've seen the climate agenda from the policy making and regulatory side. But then I've also worked for nonprofits and served on corporate boards. So I've seen kind of energy policy from a number of different vantage points. I've dedicated my life to advancing clean power, and today run the American Clean Power Association, a new trade association launched just this year, focused on advancing advancing clean power writ large. And we focus on wind, both on and offshore, solar energy, storage, and transmission. I'm delighted to join you today.
There has never been a better time to be exactly where you are, Heather. I'm so excited to hear about what you're going to be doing with American Clean Power and what this moment means for clean energy. But we have to start with Texas. I am in Tennessee right now, and there is a blizzard outside my window. I wish I could share it with you, but it's nothing like what's going on in Texas. And the amount of misinformation about the source of the power shortages there. Tucker Carlson said recently, the windmills failed like the silly fashion accessories that they are, and people in Texas died. Can you set the record straight?
Absolutely. For starters, I mean, we need to have a fact-based conversation. Practical reality here is that renewables did not fail. The bulk of the problem that we saw in Texas was actually from fossil energy. But you know what? When temperatures dropped to those levels, and a state like Texas has never seen, like, this is a once in a generation storm, they're just not prepared. And so the practical reality is that whether it was natural gas, coal, nuclear power, everybody struggled with this. And I think that the irony here is to turn around and to blame clean energy when clean energy is actually what we need to be doing to avoid, further. I mean, this storm in and of itself is a result of a changing climate, and we know the number one need to act is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and decarbonize the power sector, which is what our trade association is all about. But to turn around and single out one single energy source when there were massive failures across the energy spectrum is just completely unfair.
It's amazing to see the lack of leadership in Austin. I mean, you'd think that the enormous cost to Texans and that witnessing the center of the American energy industry, conventional energy industry, brought to its knees, would have forced Governor Abbott and more broadly the Texan leadership to have a kind of reckoning around climate change and clean energy. Instead, it seems to be deepening the divide, and I wonder if you can speak to this.
Well, I mean, listen, I think we could get wrapped up in the politics of climate action and clean energy versus coal. But what I'm focused on is, and what my member companies are focused on is first getting power back on and delivering energy to the families in Texas that need it today. Second, it is baffling to me how Texas, as a state that is the number one state for wind energy, can now turn around and say that was, the wind energy was the problem. The facts don't bear out. I think I expect that as there is analysis of what happened, why did it happen, and what do we need to do to avoid this from happening in Texas again, the facts are going to speak for themselves. And what we are going to focus on is our companies are continuing to deploy clean energy. We know that's the future. We know that if it's wind or solar, we don't, we don't have, we don't have to be subject to the costs of natural gas or coal. And what we've also learned in this instance is that there is an important role, as great as wind has been and will continue to be. There's also a real important conversation that we need to have about what is the infrastructure, what does the transmission look like? How do we make sure that we are building out the transmission so that we can move the wind and the solar to the centers of to the city centers that need it. And then I also think there's a really important opportunity for storage, and and thinking about storage as an energy source in and of itself. So I'm actually, as ACP's CEO, I'm going to be focused on how do we use this as a teachable moment to think about, like, what do we really need to do to bring in the new technologies to decarbonize the grid? And that's where our member companies want to drive this discussion.
And just on a very practical level, I have to ask this because there are still people out there who think that windmills and solar panels can't function in snow and ice and cold weather. And of course, we know Scandinavian countries, these are very, very compatible with cold weather climates. Can you just put that in very clear terms?
Yes. Well, first, this is as clear as I can get. First and foremost, wind power and solar power can absolutely function in sub-zero temperatures. And if you don't have to look any further than the state of South Dakota or North Dakota, because today they get 30% of their power from wind turbines. And as somebody who grew up in Iowa, I know it's incredibly cold in those states.
Yeah.
So the issue is not whether or not these technologies can work in cold weather, but what the manufacturers of wind farms do is look at, like, where is this project going and what do we need to do? There is something called a cold weather package that goes on projects that go in really cold states like Minnesota and those in the Midwest. And those allow the turbines to keep moving in cold weather. Unfortunately, fortunately, in Texas, this is kind of this once in a generation storm event that has led to these unusually low temperatures that nobody really expected. So it's the same, so you're seeing the same thing across the entire energy mix, right? Like, people did not plan for it to ever be this cold in the state of Texas. And I think the industry is working quickly to get those wind turbines and solar panels back up and functioning and bringing clean power to the families and businesses in Texas.
So this moment is so important, and I just want to, emphasize the Biden administration has come in. We have heard so many folks saying that this is really a critical moment. Werner Hoyer, the head of the European Investment Bank, tweeted gas is over in the first days of the Biden administration. Can you kind of speak to that? Does the Biden administration herald the end of fossil fuels?
Well, I think we have to look at what was Biden campaigning on, and he made it very clear that climate change was a central issue. He looks at that through a lens of job creation and economic growth. He looks at that through the lens of foreign policy, and he looks at that through like a public health lens as well. So we know that he recognizes the need to decarbonize by 2050. He's set for our industry, the target that he has set to decarbonize the power sector by 2035 is something we're rolling up our sleeves and want to get to work with the administration on. But I look at how he ran on these issues and what he said in terms of, these are the commitments and the policies that I want to implement. These are and here's the pathway to get there. I'd also point to a few early decisions that the administration made. First and foremost, if you look at the team that he has put in place, they are all, it's like the dream team for climate advocates, right? You've got somebody who can engage in the international community, who has the relationships and the credibility on a global basis to re-engage in the international conversation about what we need to do to decarbonize the economy and meet those 2050 targets. And that person is John Kerry. And then he's also got Gina McCarthy, who was a former EPA administrator under the Obama administration, who has, I've been in the trenches with her working on everything from fuel economy standards to the first carbon standards on coal plants. So between Gina and John Kerry, and the teams behind them, plus you've just got this, this incredible team of advocates across the administration on climate, and you've got everybody, your Department of Transportation, your Secretary of Transportation and your Secretary of Treasury talking about creating climate task forces within their own agencies. So I think both from the Biden administration and then, so there's what you can do through existing authorities. So those are the things that you don't need to go to Congress and ask. You can just do those with the stroke of a pen. And again, this is an area where the president's been very forward leaning. On day one, reversing decisions from anything from Keystone to some of the anti-climate policies from EPA and the Department of Interior, and then there's Congress, and we see great opportunity to work with certainly both sides of the aisle, because we have this. I think there's broad recognition that we have these two major challenges facing us. One is climate change, and then the second is economic growth. And the strategy that Biden wants to deploy speaks to both of those challenges. And obviously that's where ACP sees a real opportunity to engage and work with both the administration and the Congress.
Heather, Bill Gates said in his recent book that that getting to a net zero carbon footing by 2050 is the most crucial goal of our moment, but also that making reductions by 2030 the wrong way might actually prevent us from getting to zero. And so there's a real sort of tension between a 2030 goal, 2050 goal. What's your take on that? Because you were mentioning both a kind of nearer term goal and longer term goal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what's important about this conversation is that it's steeped in science, right? Bill Gates, me, Joe Biden, nobody just decided 2050 is going to be a good year for a target, right? We followed what the international scientific community said, and they spoke very clearly that we need to hit net zero by 2050, as the president has embraced, as Bill Gates talked about, and certainly as my member companies are working towards. But you can't just sort of set something off in the distance at 2050 and say okay, well, we'll just figure it out along the way and hope for the best, right? There have to be these checkpoints to stop and assess, are we on the right trajectory? Are we going to be where we need to be? And because the challenge of climate change is so complicated, you can't just look at the power sector, right? You have to look at transportation, you have to look at agriculture, you have to look at the built environment. And so to just kind of say okay, let's just hope for the best. We'll have this 2050 target. You've got to have interim targets to hold not only our country, but globally, to hold countries accountable to make sure we're on the right journey. And it's going to be, one of my favorite things about Bill Gates and the work he's doing is he has this quote, and it's right on the Breakthrough Institute's website. It's, we today produce 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases, and we're going to have to get to zero in the next 30 years. And it just kind of that's a pretty good, reminder of the scale and the scope of this challenge. And if we don't have those interim targets that are making sure that we're on the right path, we wake up in 2050 and look around and the world looks a whole heck of a lot different, and it's not a good thing.
Yeah, it's amazing how much growth there has been despite all the resistance. Jobs in solar and wind already outnumber those in coal and natural gas in 30 US states. Of course, growth internationally has been enormous. But we need to increase the growth so significantly. John Kerry has said that we need to increase renewable energy 5 times faster, phase out coal 5 times faster, transition to electric vehicles at a rate 22 times faster. How do we ramp up accelerate so quickly, and what policies need to be in place, if it's a carbon tax or otherwise, to really work within this time frame?
Yeah. So the biggest challenge today is that carbon pollution has no price associated with it. And it hasn't, for that reason, there just hasn't been a primary focus on like, what do we need to do to reduce our CO2 emissions, whether that's from a tailpipe, an airplane, a car, a car, an airplane, or a building. And so, the goal for many in industry has been to say, okay, let's set a price on carbon, and that needs to create a long-term price signal. One of the policies that Biden ran on is called a clean energy standard, right? So, in that policy, you are basically reverse engineering a price on carbon and creating regulatory certainty and predictability out to 2030 and to the 2050 timelines. And what you're doing is requiring a larger and growing share of the energy that is being created and produced. A larger share of that over time then becomes renewables. And that in and of itself, sets the long-term policy that we really need, and the certainty and predictability for my member companies to have the confidence of, continuing to invest and deploy clean energy across, all 50 states.
Yeah, but so pricing carbon is a huge effort. We know that John Kerry tried to do that, probably with your help, in 2009, 2010. And it's been politically incredibly difficult to get a price on carbon emissions. So what will it take, and what's the path forward? How politically feasible is that in the next year or 2 years?
Well, a couple of things. Right before I joined this call, I was actually reading an editorial from my home state senator, Senator Grassley, and he was inviting the Biden administration to come to Iowa to see the importance of renewable energy and what it's doing to create jobs and power the local economy. He's a Republican from a very red state, and he has been a strong advocate of clean power. Iowa as a state is number 2 in terms of producing wind. And I think we are, a few things are coming together. You see voters that in this last election cycle, they certainly, were demanding more of a dialogue around climate change. We had an entire debate just around climate change. There was no other single issue that got plucked out and it had its own debate. So I think you're seeing voters are increasingly communicating to their elected officials that this is an important issue. And that is causing both sides of the aisle to think differently about how they respond. I think the second thing you're seeing is clean power is $1 trillion part of the economy today. And we're going to create tons of jobs, whether that's in deploying solar or standing up the nation's first offshore wind turbines. Those are jobs. They are here. This is not an energy source that is some far off, like maybe we can get there. We are creating jobs in communities across all 50 states. And I think elected officials, again, on both sides of the aisle are recognizing that there is an economic opportunity here, and we need to find a way to not get left out of this picture, and to make sure that whether it's the manufacturing of a wind blade or building photovoltaic cells, that those jobs are here in America, not in China, not in Malaysia, and those are real good high-paying jobs, as you pointed out previously. I mean, there's nobody wants to miss out on new job creation. So I think a lot of this has to do with our industry working collectively with everybody from environmental advocates to the states, and sort of locking arms and helping create more political space for these conversations in Washington to happen.
So to be clear, you do think it is politically feasible to have a price on carbon and get a consensus, political consensus around that, or enough in the next 2 years?
I think it is going to be a tough challenge, but I think it's one that I expect this administration is going to prioritize, and certainly something that our industry is going to advocate.
So I agree with you. I think it's becoming more and more clear across the aisles that climate change is the biggest job creation engine of our time, largely through clean power and development. But at the same time, the fossil fuel industry is still a financial behemoth. Oil and gas production accounts for nearly 7-8% of American GDP. ExxonMobil, I believe, is still the fourth largest company in the United States. So it breaking away from will cause some pain and be a very difficult process. I mean, can you speak to that? And it's so important to be realistic about the enormous financial opportunity that exists there, but also, the pain.
Yeah. Well, look, when you talk about pain comes in a number of different forms, right? Like, we look around at whether it was the wildfires that devastated Australia or the hurricanes that were battering our coast this last hurricane season, we have to remember that there is a cost of inaction. And the one thing that I've learned from this COVID, from COVID writ large, is it is a heck of a lot harder to solve a problem once it's at your doorstep. So, it's always easy to say, like, oh, the path forward is really, really hard. But like, look at where we are today and the billions and billions of dollars that we are spending to rebuild our communities, the lives that have been lost, the challenges that we face today and in the future are not going away. So we need to get real and practical about that. We also, to your point, we need to have a real conversation about what does this transition look like? How long does that take? I think a really important part of that the Biden administration has helped inject into this discussion is, what does a just transition look like? How do we bring all communities together? But the idea that, like, completely changing how you power your economy is like, and again, there's not one solution, right? It's not like we can turn a switch overnight and just reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's going to be a journey. There are going to be tough points across the system. But I also think we can't be afraid of where we've had success, right? There's a reason that 30% of the energy in North and South Dakota comes from wind. It's because it's affordable, it's clean, it's reliable. And it doesn't matter if you're in a blue state or red state, everybody can take advantage of it. So yes, it's not going to be easy, but tackling the biggest challenges of our lifetime, we're never going to be easy. Yeah. And we can either ignore it or embrace it and try to choose the best path forward.
And the fossil fuel industries have been and can continue to be, in a much more aggressive way, investing in the new energy paradigm, right? Investing in emissions reductions technologies. They may be very well positioned to help accelerate and move this process forward and benefit from it if they engage. There are.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. I mean, I feel like every day there's, an announcement of a new investment from a fossil company in wind or solar or storage. There's also a big play in the EV space. And obviously, as the power sector, we think a lot about the electrification of the fleet, because I want to make sure that if we're using power to electrify our fleet instead of oil, that power is clean, because if we don't make that transition, we're going to miss out on that opportunity. And I know that's something that Bill Gates talked a little bit about in his speech. yesterday, but it is, we can't lose sight of the need to do both and.
Heather, I promised to let you go by 2:30 Eastern, which and we have arrived. But I do want to bring us back to Texas and bring us back to the kind of mockery we're seeing from some of the leadership of both clean power and climate change. I think it's really important to address the severity of that, and also, you know, in that within that, the enormous potential for hope right now. So can you tell us what makes you hopeful in the face of this kind of you know, refusal to recognize the realities of our moment?
Well, here's what makes me hopeful. I think that in the state of Texas, there's going to be a look back at what went wrong and how do we ensure it doesn't happen again. And in that conversation, there is going to be a discussion about what is the role of storage, what is the role of wind and solar. And there are going to be big questions answered about transmission and whether or not we have the right energy infrastructure to take our existing energy portfolio to the next step and to decarbonize it. And that is a conversation that is going to be happening in Texas. But it's also going to be a conversation that we're having in Washington. And I think, you know, working with Texas to identify what went wrong and how we change it for the future can really be a strong platform to getting some of the important legislation passed in Washington that's going to allow us to create jobs, deploy clean energy, and provide American homes and businesses with affordable energy. And that's what I think is where the big hope and opportunity lies.
Yeah, I'm so glad you made that point, Heather. It's really interesting. There's some ways in which the pandemic has been an important accelerator of, you know, resilience strategies toward resilience. And I think you're right. I think that this, you know, trauma that so many Texans are experiencing right now will be a reckoning, and also hopefully, you know, help accelerate, you know, broader strategies outside of Texas and within Texas for resilience going forward. And very last thing, can you just give us a sense of where you want to be in by APC in 5 years, 10 years? What is your vision for your newest enterprise?
Well, I mean, listen, the fact that we have an opportunity to speak in Washington, D.C. with one voice for clean power is a tremendous honor for me. And the vision that our member companies have laid out in terms of getting to the 2050 target of net zero with aggressive interim commitments, if we can, as an industry, work together to do that in a way that is mindful of the just transition that I mentioned, that is mindful of the need to work with labor and find a way to ensure that we are creating the high paying jobs. I mean, that is everything I've worked on my entire life. And I think that's where the opportunity lies, not only for ACP, but for our country as well.
And ACP, I think I might have said APZ, but I really meant ACP. Heather, congratulations, best of luck. We need you to succeed. We know you will, and it's really a pleasure to connect. I wish I could share my blizzard with you.
But I've got my own happening here in DC.
Yeah, it's coming your way, I'm sure. It's already there. All right, take care, and great to connect.
Thank you.
Goodbye, people of World War Zero. We will see you again soon.